should take this out.
No, keep it on.
I thought it'd be cold, but
No, it's not. Even if it's
But you
cold,
look
or-
good.
It's not about looking good, it's about confident. No, it's about looking good.
okay.
We're speaking. Alright, hello everybody, welcome to semi-finals 1. Congratulations to all the teams that made it through. For opening government, we have Ken and Barbie. Opening opposition, we have MARA JaiHo. Closing government, we have MARA Apam Balik. And closing opposition, we have Cooking Like Mine.
You can't stop.
Alright, so the motion, this House believes that Iran, for its own sake, should abandon all support for Shiite regimes and groups in the Middle East. I'd like to call upon the Prime Minister to defend the motion that stands in his name.
Iran has and have been seen as a growing country that is increasingly moderate, especially after the Iran nuclear deal, where they were willing to reduce their nuclear stockpile in order for better trade and to lift sanctions. However, your Iran support towards Bashar al-Assad or groups like Hezbollah does not change the very fact that people are hostile towards Iran. Anything Ob says would not change that. So long as Iran supports Bashar al-Assad or support crazy groups like Hezbollah, the trade is not going to be effective. The trade will all be lost. We say that is abhorrent, and for the sake of Iran's, in terms of socially and economically, and to utilize that trade in the best way possible, we say that we should jump ship, especially when it comes to supporting regimes like Bashar al-Assad or terrorists like Hezbollah. We say that this puts strains on their ability to affect their policy internally and social policy abroad. This is why we move it. So what are we okay with? Sit down. We're okay with we want Iran to remove rhetorical or political support or religious support towards Shiite groups like Bashar al-Assad or groups like Hezbollah, and remove like all sorts of economic support. And secondly, that we will pull out all troops from those kind of places. So this is what this debate is about. Like, Ob can't tell you that Iran wouldn't do it, because they have to assume that Iran would do it because this is in their best interest. There are two arguments in my speech, and they focus on the principle of how we best utilize the Iran nuclear deal. Firstly, why it's no longer viable or in the interest of Iran to support this kind of groups. And secondly, how it affects the way they interact with other countries, which is pretty harmful, like what we see today. Firstly, why it's no longer able to support. So when it comes to this thing, let's look at the genesis of why they actually support groups like Bashar al-Assad of Hezbollah. It's more often than not similar ideologies, sectarian ideologies like religion. Because like Bashar al-Assad and Hezbollah are Shiite majority, and they believe that they should help them because they are naturally brothers. More so, Iran has been doing this because it's trying to strengthen more power into the Shiite groups when it comes to the Sunni and Shiite conflict in that area, because they want Shiite stronghold in those countries. Why is it not important for Iran to support this group anymore? Firstly, we tell that Bashar al-Assad, like, sure, he has been friends with Iran, but right now, Bashar al-Assad has no power or no interest to help or derive economic benefits to Iran in the first place. Bashar al-Assad is dealing with his own problems, and he himself needs to get aid from dodgy countries like Russia and China. Iran does not derive any benefit from this. If you want Iran to suffer the same fate and the perception on Russia, go with side opposition. Secondly, we tell that Bashar al-Assad and groups like Hezbollah have no international legitimacy at all. They commit war crimes, they commit war rape, they perpetuate conflicts that you can see ISIS, and they perpetuate the conflict that lead to a chain reaction to those kind of individuals stuck at borders where you have xenophobic countries that don't accept them. We tell you that we would pull out support towards this kind of countries because we don't want Iran to be linked towards the conflict that is perpetuated over there. We want dealing and traveling to Europe. Next, what are the harms if they still stay friends? We tell that Iran would stand all alone in those in that area where everyone will be hostile towards them. Everyone will continue to be hostile to them, and this means that lifting the sanctions which they removed their autonomy in order to have trade, they would have no utility at all. But lastly, what are the aims of Iran that they wanted to achieve? What can be ascertained from the nuclear deal was that Iran was willing to reduce its autonomy, its military power, in order to gain legal legitimacy around the world. At that point in time, they cannot connect themselves with terrorists or dictators like Bashar al-Assad. At the point where they connect with those kind of people, those perceptions still stays. So the comparative and the conclusion is this. You either have a failed negotiation where those perceptions still stays, or on our side, when negotiations, the negotiation is done in the best way, which I'll explain in my later argument, and where the trade-offs are legit and good trade-offs right now. Because let's remind you that people in Iran suffered under the sanctions, that they didn't have things skyrocket, price of things skyrocket. Under our side, when trade is allowed to happen because people stop being hostile towards Iran, this is when we best utilize those things. Before I move on,
Iran is currently in a cold war with the Sunni Saudi Arabia, which is at the precipice of an actual outbreak. How does Hassan Rouhani justify to his hardliners abandoning their own national interests?
We agree that sometimes you have to abandon your own national or sectarian interest. But this is a trade-off we have to make. It is for the greater good of that country. Because seriously, if you use MICE POI, then the Iran nuclear deal wouldn't have existed in the first place, right? Iran wants a political legitimacy it has in the world. We think it's a pretty good idea. Secondly, the effects when they interact with other countries. Firstly, it's more about perception, because the world generally always see Iran as hostile because they connect themselves with Hezbollah or what. That's why Israel is so scared that US lifting the sanctions would lead to more funding from Iran into groups like Hezbollah. Even though Iran is moderating, people still perceive them to be dodgy because they channel money into this kind of group. We have to remove aid to this kind of dodgy bodies. It's in the better interest to remove that perception and for people to derive the benefits from the nuclear deal. But secondly, let's talk about hostility, because our side best prevent those kind of hostility.
Yes,
so long as people and countries continue to be hostile towards Iran, the lift of the sanctions and the trade-off Iran's government make will never work. People will never derive the benefit at the best way possible. And mind you, Republicans will continue to bash this policy. They may even use the Congress to overturn their foreign policy, not to continue putting sanctions on Iran, which means Iran would suffer even more, because Republicans prey on the fact that you are supporting terrorists. We remove that. But lastly, discourse internationally. So Israel and Republicans keep claiming that they don't want to support Iran because of those terrorist links and whatsoever. If Iran does not support Hezbollah, two things will happen. Firstly, it destroys dodgy discourses from Israel and Republicans, because now Iran is now willing to let not trade with terrorists, and therefore we know that Israel is probably babbling nonsense if they say we should not support them. But secondly, it better reach out to other Middle Eastern Sunni states, because Middle East countries are naturally suspicious about Iran, even though they are moderating right now. Now they can't go suspicious because they are Iran is willing to make the trade-off in order to be more inclusive in those kind of groups. This means that Saudi Arabia will not stigmatize Iran so much because Iran pulls out support from Hezbollah. The trade-off here is simple. It's between empowering their sectarian beliefs or the trade-off on what their purpose was envisioned upon. We support them to utilize and better help Iranians on the ground.
Thank you, Father.
Just use my timer.
Now let's call upon the leader of the opposition. You have the floor. Thank you.
Just me. Did I?
Madam Chair, we think that the increasingly moderate Iran is in the best position to ensure stability in the Middle East that will result in economical and political stability for Iran themselves. Understanding that, in this debate, I'll tell you a few things. I'll tell you why Iran is a point of moderation for Middle Eastern countries as well as for Shiite regimes within that area. Secondly, I'll tell you why the signaling will result in the moderation of most of these groups. Lastly, I'll talk to you about accountability and then spillover conflict. Most of the rebuttals will be at the end of my substantive because I'll have to build a lot of characterization first. So firstly, we think that we agree inside opening government that Iran is currently moderating. That means that the position in which Iran would be taking in this particular action to continue with what they will be doing by supporting the rest of the regime will be in a more moderate way as opposed to the more extreme way. We think that will be very beneficial. We think it's evidence of the nuclear deal, the agreement to disarm to gain confidence of the international community and for collective security. We think that the sanctions resulted in the sanction being removed resulted in great economical and political win for the Iranian government. That means that they have every incentive to continue on that line of moderation to ensure economical and political stability in their area. We think that that trend of moderation will continue and expand into their foreign relationship and international relationship. We think this was evident when Iran freed 11 political prisoners, including prominent human rights lawyers. That means that they show that the way in which they are willing to engage with foreign relationships are a way of moderation. We think that the way they will continue with this conflict would be the same. So understanding that, we think that Iranians' disengagement will only then result in the isolation and further radicalization of this Shiite regime. So firstly, we think Iran is a point of moderation. We think that if most of these Shiite regimes are continuously dependent on Iran for support and funding, Iran have a lot of say on their actions and the things that they do, because they carry the collective name and legitimacy of Shiite. That means that we're able to reduce oppression within those regimes. Iran is able to tell them to reduce the amount of oppression. You can moderate groups like Hezbollah, you can moderate Houthis. We understand that this happens progressively, but financial dependence is a huge bargaining point in which Iran is able to capitalize on. We think that's extremely important. We think that if Iran is able to support them, given the current trend, we can move towards moderating them. We think moderating these groups isn't the hardest things to do, because most of their demands are indeed legitimate demands. Things like having minority rights or religious minority rights, those things are legitimate demands that Iran can work around. That means that Iran can push for diplomatic means or it can push for the reduction of violence in order to achieve the same means. That means that negotiating with the Houthis as well as Hezbollah wouldn't be very hard if Iran can use their diplomatic prowess to ensure that they're able to progressively get the rights that they want. We think Iran will be able to show them that point of moderation. No, thank you. Secondly, we also think this sends a signaling that Shiites can also be moderate. I think that this is a resounding effect, because we don't think that Shiites should always take a position of radicalization. We think that with this can change. We also think that because Iran is accountable and currently pressurized to maintain their standing in the international community, they will always be accountable and ensure that there are as much as possible humane methods in which this group operate. We also think that furthermore, no thank you, I'll take closing in a minute, for Iran's own sake, their policy under side opening government that they refuse to talk about might force Iran to denounce their alliance to Shiites, people who share the same principle. We think that that's extremely problematic because this Shiite-Sunni conflict has gone on for so long. It's extremely polarizing. So that means that the citizens will always demand alliance to other Shiite regimes who genuinely believe that people in those Shiite regimes as well as Shiite groups are individuals who are oppressed and have legitimate views that they want to forward. Obviously, people in Iran now believe that the way to forward those views is moderate, but they still inherently believe that there is a national interest to ensure that the Shiite position in the Middle East is necessarily protected. We think that's extremely important. We think that with absence of that, the citizens will be radicalized to feel that the government is dropping not only Shiite regimes, but the Shiite belief in totality. Because Shiite can also be fluid, transcending borders, and they all believe that their brothers and sisters who are Shiite needs to be protected. Closing.
If moderation is the base of Iran's political stance, at what point will moderation occur towards radical unmoderation groups with different views of operations like Hezbollah?
We think that that's why we have said just now in our earlier substantive that Hezbollah as well as Houthis all have legitimate rights in which they want. The point in which you tell them that Iran is in a position to help you obtain those rights without going through radicalization and progressively getting those rights, we think Iran is able to do that. Iran is in perfect position to do that because of the financial accountability those groups have towards Iran. We think that if, as long as they're able to achieve their goals, moderation is something that's possible. But in absence of Iran's engagement, moderation is impossible because that means that the group won't have funding from Iran and feel isolated and feel like the only way in which they're able to gain their rights is by more violence and more power and more forces because they don't feel that they are in a position to do that and they don't have a moderating point that is accountable. No, thank you. Now let's talk about the spillover conflict towards Iran. We think that firstly, Iran is also geographically proximate to a lot of these countries with the Shia and Sunni divide. We think that because they're geographically proximate, a lot of rebel groups will be moving in between borders and all those kind of things means that they're proximate towards a spillover conflict. That means that they have and need to regulate the conflict within those areas. The point in which they're able to regulate those conflicts is to be a voice of moderation towards both sides in that conflict. That means that tell the Sunnis in those areas that right now we're willing to engage with you and be the point of moderation. And tell the Shiite groups in those areas that we want to be able to achieve the same thing you want, but by a point of moderation. We think that this at the very least is able to regulate or tune down the conflict. We think that the conflict, if not tuned down, will affect Iran in a horrible way. Secondly, we also think that because they used to support this regime, they were already included and already invested in the war. That means that you cannot exclude the possibility of the spillover conflict and say the moment we disengage from the war, everything will be fine. And then you are already invested in the war. That means that you have to ensure that the war is moderated in order for you to gain your own stability. At the end of the day, Middle Eastern countries are all connected and mostly geographically proximate. That means that most of the conflict and your economical stability is dependent upon the moderation of those areas. We think this new policy change of Iran is perfect to ensure moderation in the Middle East. We're extremely proud to oppose.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. To defend the case from side opening government, I would call for the Deputy Prime Minister.
The point of this debate, the point of Iran conceding to the nuclear deal with the US was so that Iran could protect its own strategic position in the world in order to maintain the trade deals that it had, in order to save its own skin. We don't think that this debate is about Iran trying to help some other place gain moderation, but even if it were, we think that that's too high of a burden for opposition to achieve. I'll tell you why they will fail in achieving their burdens. But most importantly, just remember, right, this is about what Iran needs to do to benefit itself, and we think the way to benefit themselves is to show just how moderate they are, right, as opposed to allowing the Middle East to stay so suspicious of them. I'll ask 3 questions in rebuttal before I move on to some positive, constructive material. But first of all, what becomes of the extremist groups of Assad? Because Elo tried to say that we are more in a better position to be able to moderate them, right? But how is that true, right? We think that Iran is in no place now to moderate them, especially when we are providing them with weapons at this point, because we're not just giving them money. But even if we are just giving them money, right? Remember that everything that we give to Assad and to Hezbollah is another dollar, is more resources that is given to their inhumane acts of terrorism, right? So that's not, so that isn't Iran trying to moderate them. That is Iran fueling the extremism that happens there, right? No, thank you. We also don't think that Iran has that much influence anyway in them. No, thank you. Because even if we withdraw our resources from them, most of their resources and their weapons come from places like Russia, right? So it's not as if we are the only ones there that will want moderation. Russia is still there. They don't want moderation. They don't have any stake in it, right? So we don't have that kind of power. That's a sad burden for you to take. No, thank you. But let's talk about this idea of spillover, right? We don't think spillover will happen because a lot of time, like there's a lot of dependence that is
the Assad regime has on them. But even if that's not true, we think that what Kenneth told you just now about how Assad has much bigger problems to deal with, such as the various Syrian rebel groups that are already going against him right now. Right? We think there's bigger fish to fry as opposed to going into Iran now just because they've withdrawn support for him. Ultimately, we think the process of being able to affect change in Syria or in these other regimes is going to be too long, and the huge hostility that will result from that is too much of a harm for Iran to take. No, thank you. Second of all, what becomes of Iran's conflicts with other countries such as Saudi? This is in response to Mai's POI just now, right? So here's the thing: we think it's a lot more likely that those kinds of conflicts will stop here, right? Because let's look at what they're talking about here, right? Support of Assad and Hezbollah, there's nothing for Iran, right? All it does, especially when Iran gives weapons to Assad, in fact, right? That's what fuels those kinds of wars, and that's what makes the war that Saudi Arabia declares on Iran so much more legitimate. When we take away the legitimacy of their claims upon them, sure, we are still a Shiite regime, but at least we aren't a Shiite regime anymore that is supporting those kinds of death tolls, right? So at least in that sense, we become these smaller fish that they will want to fight. They will focus their attentions elsewhere, right? So ultimately, we take away the source of the conflict within them. We don't make that conflict legitimate anymore because we are indeed a moderate regime that does not support terrorist acts of Syria. No, thank you. After this question, third of all, though, are the current shows of moderation enough? Because they told we don't think so, right? Well, all they told us is that, oh my guys, they're really trying to be moderate. But here's the thing, we don't think it's enough, right? There's a huge opposition still coming towards them, as evidenced in all of their arguments from Saudi, from Qatar, right? And that's where they need to have the support of the people around them, right? In the Middle East, it's true, it's not going to happen overnight. They are still a Shiite regime, but this is a side where it's a lot more likely, where they have a better, more strategic position in the Middle East, where at least they can strengthen their relationship with the Democratic Party of the United States, right? Because remember, they never responded to the fact that the Republicans hold a majority in the House right now, and Republicans hate Iranians, right? And Republicans are strengthened in their hate for Iranians as long as Iranians fund these kinds of horrible terrorist regimes. If we take that away from the Republicans, it's a lot more likely that Democrats in the US will going to fight for changes that will affect the Iranians, and that's what's going to be better for them, right? We don't care about your moderation. We won't be able to affect that kind of change, and that change will only harm us. Yes.
Money may empower these groups, but if Iran doesn't fund them, other collectives who share the radicalist values will then fund them. The trade-off is that their bridge of influence is now a moderate force rather than a radical force.
Okay, thank you. But here's the thing, right? On a balance, those extremist groups, the extremist groups that are funding these Assad regimes are already funding them, right? Russia is already trying to bomb this out. The difference is this, right? We can't do anything about it because we are also giving them weapons, right? The best thing for us to do is at least save our skin, make ourselves, establish ourselves as moderators. Maybe in the future, then when we have shown ourselves to be better as in Iran, maybe we can talk to them then. But we think that what's best for us is to deal with our own country's problems as opposed to others. Let's talk about some things. First of all, why will this move spark a positive discourse on the reconstruction of Iranian Shiite identity? Because what they tell us is that when we denounce these other Shiite regimes, we're denouncing the Shiite religion as a whole. We don't think so, right? What we think is happening really is that we change the kinds of tensions that happen, right? Because the reason why you get sanctions, the reason why everyone hates them so much is because the Shiite identity is homogenized, right? Where all of them are seen to be extremists. But here's how you change that. When you get Iranians, right, who are majority, in fact, almost all Shiites, right? When the government begins to recognize that being Shiite is not the be-all, end-all as the standard of allyship, where they begin to realize, right, that it's okay if sometimes we don't support other Shiites because sometimes they can be extremists. And this is an essential move because it's much more powerful than the move to get rid of the nuclear deal. The nuclear deal, a lot of people simply see it as something that they did out of desperation because they wanted the sanctions lifted. In doing this, they show it's not just desperation, it's also a mark, it's a signaling effect where now it's no longer taboo to disregard, to go against other Shiite groups because we want to be different and we want to change ourselves. We think that this kind of narrative from the government trickles down to the Iranians, right? Especially when their foreign policy and their international relations and their positioning in the Middle East will be improved. We think that's when moderation amongst them and recognizing that they have to be different from other extremist Shiite groups, that's when it's going to be internalized within them, right? We think the best example of that is when Iranians gave up what they loved, their nuclear power, in exchange for better trade opportunities and a lift of sanctions. It's true, they didn't like it at first and they thought, no, this is our Iranian Shiite identity. But those things can change, especially when you see benefits when you change those particular things. This is the only side that changes Iranians and their identity as Shiites for the more moderate in the long term. Second thing though, why does this challenge harmful Sunni narratives and improves the strategic position in the Middle East? Recognize this, that all that the Iranian nuclear deal has done has made Democratic Party maybe like them a little bit more and have a little bit more say whenever they talk about Iran, right? But the problem when they still support Assad and Hezbollah means that they're still seen as perpetuators of a humanitarian crisis. For Iranian citizens to allow this means that they signal that the moderation of the Iranian deal is for real, that this isn't something that you should be suspicious of anymore. We're willing to do whatever it takes to be moderate and not perpetuate the killings of people by these extremist terrorist groups, right? What's that going to mean? It's going to mean that they're less of a target in the Middle East now, because it means they have more support in international talk, especially when they're not the ones that people are trying to hate on now, right? But most importantly, we think that even if in their best case, they're good, like if they argue like there is no such thing as you're going to get more support from the Middle East because you're still Iran. The thing is though, if you can give more legitimacy to the US Democratic Party when they argue in Parliament or they argue in the UN in the UNSC that Iran's interests should be protected, they have more legitimacy there because at least they're protecting someone that. These are the kinds of things that affect actual policies that will support Iran, right? All they're trying to do is give Iran more responsibilities. They can't achieve those responsibilities of moderation, and they shouldn't have to protect Iran. Thank you.
Yeah.
Deputy Prime Minister. Finish up the opening half of the debate. I will call for the Deputy Speaker. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, the geopolitical framework of the world transcends beyond the borders of one country and transcends beyond the identities of one community, ladies and gentlemen. And we believe that it is more strategic for Iran to facilitate the movement of moderation that can exist in the world. Because in absence of this particular policy, we would argue from opening opposition that the Shiite groups that are talking about don't go away, that the sort of atrocities that they're talking about don't go away. Therefore, at that point, how do we then bridge that moderation to ensure that there's some degree of accountability that exists within these groups, ladies and gentlemen? We think we provide that under our side of the house. The overlying presumption that exists in the opening government's case in this debate is that citizens in Iran hate these groups and don't really care about them, missing the nuance in Jasmine's speech, that there's a personal investment that they feel within the Shia movements within other groups as well. Because the identity of the Shia groups in general are attacked, ladies and gentlemen, and that is why they don't get angry at the point in which their state starts funding these groups, ladies and gentlemen. If we agree that these groups don't that citizens don't feel a personal investment, then the Iranian government wouldn't have been able to fund these groups to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to argue 3 questions in my speech. Firstly, who better ensures moderation? We will argue that opposition does. Secondly, in evaluating the sectarian ideologies and who better grants legitimacy in their movements. And lastly, why Iran should not be held at ransom to drop their identities, that is an identifying point within their communities, ladies and gentlemen. So firstly, who better ensures moderation under this debate? Firstly, we will argue that the reason why people feel a personal investment within these groups, especially people who identify as Shia, is because there is a shared collective identity that relies upon the fact there is an immutable characteristic that I am a Shia and my identity as a Shia comes first, irrespective of my nationality, ladies and gentlemen. That is why individuals within Iran very well support conflicts that exist within other countries because they believe that their identity as a Shia transcends beyond nationality and transcends beyond borders. That is why there is an active prosecution that exists within status quo, that there is a perceived attack upon Shiites being the most extreme school of thought within Islam, as opposed to recognizing the fact that there's different categorization of Shiites that exist within status quo, i.e. moderate Shiites that fight alongside Sunnis in Iraq, ladies and gentlemen, against the fight in ISIS. No, thank you. That is why Jasmine's argumentation was extremely important. We agreed very much that the transition in moderation can be a slow progression of change. However, in the absence of allowing for moderation to exist, as well as the accountability that we provide because we are funding you, the absence then becomes no thank you, then it will turn to other groups that have no incentive to assure accountability. Countries like Russia and countries like China, ladies and gentlemen, they agree. There are many Shiite groups that are already funded by Russia to begin with in status quo. How do we then balance out that position of power at the point in which you don't allow for a point of identity that is common for them to bridge that transition? Ladies and gentlemen, sit down, Kenneth, calm down. Secondly, on this idea of sectarian ideology, it is important to note that in an ideological conflict, it's not always black and white like opening government presumes. You can't accuse only Shiites of being shit in this conflict, right? Because we will argue that Sunnis also commit atrocities as well. What we will argue on the outside of the house is that the overwhelming support that Sunnis have from states like Saudi Arabia means that there is a disproportionate position of power in terms of how you view them, in terms of how we perceive them, ladies and gentlemen. Oftentimes, Sunnis are perceived to be the more legitimate school of thought because apparently Saudi Arabia is backing them, and the more extreme position is often attributed to Shiites. Oftentimes, this means that it delegitimizes the position in which Shiites take as well as their demands, ladies and gentlemen, which means that it often leads to the radicalization that opening government was talking about. What we will argue in this debate is that you need to be able to provide a balance of power and to show that the sort of victim card that Sunnis play in this regard is not the overwhelming idea that exists. Sometimes Shiites can be legitimate, sometimes Shiites can be reasonable, ladies and gentlemen. Because we will argue that in order for people to believe that your claims are legitimate, you need someone who is perceived to be a legitimate actor in this particular regard. That is why we think it is more strategic for Iran to come in and say, I am a legitimate actor right now because the United States perceives me to be an ally. Therefore, it means that the claims of my people are also legitimate, ladies and gentlemen. There is a dissonance that exists in status quo in the way in which other people who are not Shiites engage with the Shiite community. We think at the very least you allow for a point of commonality when you show that your ally is also my ally, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, we would disagree on mass that the ability for you to claim that Shiites are illegitimate in general does not transcend to other people. Because the way in which it acts, in the scenario in which you have an extreme Shiite group taking extreme measures, oftentimes the generalization that you were talking about will still exist as well, and it will often be attributed to the moderate citizens that exist within Iran, ladies and gentlemen. This is why you need to have a personal interest and a personal investment in this particular regard. We will argue that the ability for Shiites to be more moderated becomes a lot easier on the outside at the point in which you don't point the conflict to be black and white and say you are illegitimate just because you come from that community. Lastly, why Iran shouldn't be held at ransom to drop their identity that becomes a unifying point of the event.
If radical groups view moderation as compliance and giving in to the West, at what point can you assure moderation of the group before Iran is seen as collectively radical?
Number one, Iran won't be seen as collectively radical at the point in which they are able to moderate those groups. And the reason why those groups will be moderated, ladies and gentlemen, is because someone is taking a position of saying these groups have legitimate claims and I, being a legitimate actor, support this position, ladies and gentlemen. That is why the radicalization argument then disappears. In absence of this, you create that perpetual cycle of radicalization at the point in which they turn to other actors that are perceived to be understanding of that conflict as well as illegitimate in that regard. So they say that people will always, so we will argue that at the point in which you don't support these regimes and allow for a point of moderation to exist, people will always look at Iran as well as the Shiite community with suspicion, because you build upon that front that this particular community has a substantial amount of individuals who are extreme in nature and cannot be regulated, ladies and gentlemen. And the way in which people perceive groups that have immutable characteristics is always on a simplistic view, right? Muslims are all terrorists, African Americans are all bullies and gangsters, right? And we think that the ability for you to break this rhetoric comes at the point in which a moderate actor comes in and says there are different categorization and spectrums of Shia that exist, and their demands are legitimate demands, ladies and gentlemen. We think that at the point in which there is a point of commonality, as well as the potential for my claims to be viewed as legitimate, it is far more likely that you allow for them to be moderated, ladies and gentlemen. That is why the Republican rhetoric that side of the House was talking about shouldn't be holding Iran at ransom by saying that you should listen to us and our standards, ladies and gentlemen. Because at the point in which these groups go to countries like Russia and China, the sort of Republican rhetoric and those bigoted centrics that you were talking about will still exist and make it far worse, because the discussion then becomes around Iran and why the hell didn't you do anything about it in order to ensure moderation exists on the outside of the House, ladies and gentlemen. We think this rhetoric is powerful. This rhetoric has the potential to spill over. This rhetoric has the potential outcome of attaching a negative consequence to Iran's perception in the international community. The way in which we bridge this conflict is to provide a point of commonality and a point of moderation. I've never been prouder to oppose.
Thank you, Deputy Leader, for position and speech. Now let's call for the member of government to open up debate for the closing round.
have extra water?
Here.
Apam. Jangan balik. I don't get it. We'll try to see. Lawa.
It's hard for Iran to maintain regional stability and also push for extremist Shiite groups to be more moderate and at the same time, at the expense of legitimizing their violent acts and at the same time using the incentive of Western forces to be friendly towards Iran in the future. Because we believe that under our side, all outcomes are contingent upon Iran successfully moderating these extremist Shiite groups, which we will prove to you how it's very challenging to do so and it's very difficult. That's why on the balance of likelihood and probability, it's hard for Iran alone to do it. But for that, let's take a look at some responses. So firstly, in Jay's speech when she said that we're denouncing the identity of Shiite groups and other Shiite citizens in the Arab state because they share a collective identity and they share the same values and whatnot, and they want to continue identifying themselves as Shiites, and that's why they affiliate themselves with these extremist groups. But we believe that your identity as a Shiite, sure, you could place that first before your identity as an Iranian, but you could also place that identity as a Shiite to be a personal identity, to be just like how we personalize our faith and our religion towards our own identity. It should not be determined by violent extreme Shiite regimes and Shiite groups, right? For example, Sunnis don't identify themselves with ISIS just because ISIS are all Sunnis. They don't say, oh, I'm also like ISIS because we're all Sunnis. They don't do it that way. They personalize their own views to fit to their own identity. Yeah. So other responses will be reinterpreted to my extension. So firstly, let's take a look at the extreme ideology of Shiite regimes and militias and how and this is why they're unlikely to be more moderate in status quo. So firstly, their principles lie on absolutism. They antagonize Sunnis absolutely. These might not necessarily be the ideologies that Shiites as a normal citizen hold on to, but these are the ideologies that the Shiite regimes hold on dearly to, and they believe that they're more superior than Sunnis. That's why they believe that they absolutely antagonize Sunnis. This is why Shiite militias are notorious for being violent, notorious for ethnic cleansing of Sunnis, and also the slaughtering of women and rape and whatnot. Secondly, the Shiite alliance to fight for minority. With regards to Shiite alliance to fight for minority rights, this came in Jasmine's speech. But the thing about supporting these alliances, the thing about Iran supporting these alliances, are at the expense of legitimizing their violent means. Because when you denounce the alliance, you tell people that that measures like ethnic cleansing are an atrocious way to fight for human rights. Your measures to fight for your own minority rights is wrong, therefore we don't want to support you in doing so. For example, ISIS believes that they're fighting for rights of Sunnis, doesn't mean that Saudi Arabia should support them. That's why Saudi Arabia doesn't support them. Even if one is wrong, even though they're fighting for the disenfranchised Sunnis. Before I go on, okay.
So sectarian divide happens in Iran as well. Just because the Shiite and Sunni divide happens outside of Iran and is pervasive over there doesn't mean that the spillover rhetoric would happen in Iran as well. How do you moderate that within your own country?
We believe that the majority of Iranians are moderate. That's why they voted in Hassan Rouhani. Therefore, within Iran, it's easier to deal with these Sunni-Shiite conflicts because they are willing to compromise their own values as Shiites or as Sunnis in order to be united with their other citizens, regardless of whether or not they are Sunnis and Shiites. Therefore, this debate then revolves around the conflicts
surrounding Iran instead of what's happening in Iran. So secondly, this came in a bit in Jasmine's speech, but Jay expanded on it later on in the debate. It was about how Iran could make conditional support to Shiite militias. Like if you stop if you stop killing people, we might give you more material support and whatnot. But the thing about extremist groups is it's hard to change their mentality because they have been entrenched into such an extreme ideology and they believe they're right all the time. They're very self-righteous like that. So if Iran continues to give material support, it doesn't guarantee a change on your side or to alter the extreme stances of Shiite groups. In both sides of the debate, these Shiite groups will have other organizations and other bodies besides Iran to support them. But when Iran makes their support conditional at the expense of compromising the values that are entrenched in mentality of Shiite groups, they're more like these Shiites are more likely to go for other help anyway. They wouldn't want Iran, they wouldn't want to accept Iran's donations or Iran's material support because they don't want to compromise their own values. They believe they're right and they should stay that way. That's how their extreme mentality works. But also, Iran does this at the risk of losing US interests to vouch for Iran in the international sphere. This is how you hurt the international relations in Iran's perspective.
Last one. Okay. Thank you. So external donors exist. The question is whether or not, on a balance, it will be better for it to exclusively be external donors that are extreme like Russia and China to control these extreme Shiite regimes or groups.
You see, this debate is also more about Iran's interest and how we best make Iran more progressive, not the region around it. Therefore, even though we believe that under your side anyway, even if you have Iran giving them material support, they were more likely to choose external donors too because they don't want to change. But at your side, at least in government side, we significantly decrease the support for Shiites to propagate violence, and that's more guaranteed on our side because Iran is not materially supporting them or supporting them in any way. They lose legitimacy from Iran. Okay. Next. This was another clash in Jay's speech and how we change the perception that Shiites can be moderate as well. You see, Iran is already Iran is already growing this reputation as a Shiite country, right? This means if they continue to support extremely violent Shiite groups, it contradicts the identity that Iran is trying to construct in status quo. Because at the same time, people question whether or not is Iran trying to be moderate. But even if they are trying to be moderate, why are they still funding violent extremist groups to continue to be more violent, to continue to kill more people? Because that's not a moderate thing for you to do. Why are you funding terrorists? That kind of thing. And these are the kinds of things that the US could question. That's how they'll be less likely to vouch for Iran in the international community. Therefore, for a more progressive Iran and for a more moderate Iran, go with side.
Thank you, member of the government. Now I call for the opposition.
Go, Mike!
But you're all way.
Just don't look, Mike.
Yeah, I realize.
Just don't look.
I'll
And they have to say all three teams in a bit. Do what you believe.
competition for my
Shit. Did a good job in forwarding how Iran can capitalize on its moderation to affect the Middle East positively. But how CO will enter this debate is by characterizing the domestic politics of Iran, the power of the political hardliners and Ayatollah Khomeini to remove the political prowess of Hassan Rouhani. So should Rouhani abandon Shiites, you think the power of Rouhani's moderation that OO tried to materialize is completely impossible when they abandon these Shiite groups? We are the pretext that needs to be proven before OO's benefits can materialize in this debate. But let's make one clarification because our burden will be much simpler. Because even if we fail to prove that the Middle East will improve, we still believe that we will be able to ensure that a progressive Iran continues to exist if they don't abandon Shiite groups. Before that, a few main rebuttals. Let's do with OG firstly.
The first thing they told you, and 80% of their speech, is that the benefit is to disassociate with terrorism and atrocities. But the thing is, if disassociation is an effective political strategy, then why does OG claim under their model that American politicians still hate Iran even after a significant nuclear concession? What we're going to claim is this, that your signaling effect will have marginal impact when there are massive remnants of Iranian history burdening their perception. So what should be the main priority of Iran here? They should be trying to achieve a long-term genuine change that comes in the form of a reform Iran that doesn't actually have structural human rights violation. We believe that kind of change only happens when the moderate power of Rouhani still remains within the hearts and the minds of Iranians on the ground, and that is the larger priority versus a marginal signaling effect. Because the signaling effect is completely circumstantial on any sorts of policies. Either right now, your signaling effect could potentially be you are also associating with the Sunnis that control ISIS. It could go either way, guys. It's completely based on how individuals digest this information. So your larger priority is actually a reform Iran that will send the most genuine and long-term signaling effect that you're trying to protect. Secondly, and this engages with both sides, which is this regresses the trend of moderation that is the byproduct of the nuclear deal. We say exactly that. How did Hassan Rouhani sell the narrative to Iranians on the ground that the nuclear deal was good? They told you it's because it was in national interest, because sanctions are hurting our economy, therefore getting rid of the nuclear deal helps you on the ground. We are not doing it for others, we are doing it for self-preservation, for Iranian domestic politics. And that's the difference between the nuclear deal failing in 2005, when Rouhani was forced to resign from being the chief of counsel when he decided to concede on uranium enrichment, versus the nuclear deal succeeding in 2015. Because in 2005, Ahmadinejad said what's in your national interest is to have nuclear empowerment to protect your national security. And in 2015, to protect your own national interest, therefore you got rid of nuclear deal. So you cannot sell this narrative that we should abandon national interest for the sake of other people. We don't think that gets you the kind of political capital to pass these policies. Next, let's deal with the arguments coming from opposing government. This is a bit weird because their version of extension was just random rebuttals to opening opposition, which we may or may not necessarily want to defend. But let's look at the things that we want to defend anyways, right? Number one, they told you that Shiites will turn away from Iranian funding if these funds are conditional. Guys, Iranian government will not be dumb about this. They won't say like, only take this funding if you fulfill condition A, B, and C. They'll be very progressive in the way they approach. Because you create a bridge of connection and trust between these two parties, that kind of political power and financial funding will go, if you're able to do this, you could potentially get much more funding. And because you trust these individuals to not do things to your own detriment, that's why there's political influence that is sustained over that kind of interaction. That's how you change their minds. Not because you give conditional aid, because we don't want them to take aid from purely external forces that enjoy their radicalism. But secondly, they say that being a Shiite doesn't mean you should support a radical Shiite group. We think there's a massive homogenization of Shiites who uses force under status quo. Because according to them, anyone who uses force are terrorists. But there are differences. Sometimes Shiite groups can be oppressed rebel groups like in Syria, unlike Shiite rebel groups in Iraq. The difference here is that you're making the homogenization between whom we should help and who we should not help, Mr. Speaker. We believe there will be oppressed Shiite groups, and the Iranian people will not stand by that oppression because of the shared collective values that Shiites are a community that we need to protect under that group. A lot more rebuttals will be incorporated within my actual extension, but before that, yes.
The Iranian government that continues to fund the oppressions of Assad is never going to be able to reconstruct the extremist identity of Shiite Iranians, right? How do you fix that?
It's not going to be a holistic reconstruction, but whatever progressive gradual change that you can bring can only come as a construct of having that bridge of connection and trust versus having absolutely zero connection. The comparative here is that you do nothing to reduce that radicalism because ideologies will persist no matter how many people you kill. The only way to actually internally sustain that gradual changes in minds is to be in constant engagement and having them feeling like they are a willing participant in that gradual change. That's how you create at least marginal change over zero change at all the side of government. We think that Iran is extremely unique in its political climate in which it constantly is torn between moderates and political hardliners. We think the successes of moderates within Iran is something extremely new and extremely fragile. We've only seen it in 2013 forwards, and Rouhani is at the precipice of not sustaining that change. How? The question that we'll answer to you in CO is how powerful is Rouhani exactly in his attempt to create a modern Iran? We're going to give you two levels. Number one, We think he's the only person who is able to connect the bridge between hardliners and moderates by selling a narrative that being moderate actually benefits all of you political conservatives as well. But these successes has to be personally agreed by the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini. What characterization are we going to give you? Number one, he was only able to contain the anger of political hardliners when they claimed that the nuclear deal was a farce by saying the success of the nuclear deal is owed to the support and the advice of the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini. But secondly, when he got into office, he is the first ever moderate that the Supreme Leader Ayatollah actually gave a brand of approval. That is in the way in which he was able to create some level of influence that is extremely precarious and extremely dependent on the Ayatollah being on his side. Here's the second thing we're going to show you. We think the Ayatollah will reject this, and his power within Iran is one where he has structurally failed to make any progressive change when there is a collective consensus of hardliners against them. In what sense? Number one, in his campaign, he promised to free reformist opposition leaders who were held without trial since 2011. The only reason he couldn't do it is because hardliners were collective in their consensus, and the Ayatollah completely rejected that kind of concession. He also promised to remove media censorship, something that the Ayatollah did not agree with. And here's the conclusion. We think that Rouhani can be stopped by political hardliners and he can be removed from power. Here's the important harm that will bring to your knowledge. Above all, the Supreme Leader Ayatollah is not just the Supreme Leader, he's the religious leader of the nation. The only reason he's so powerful with conservatives on the ground because he represents the Shiite collective religious value. Above all national interest, the religious interest is the main priority of the Ayatollah Khomeini. Once you abandon the Shiite interest and the Shiite collective, no longer will Rouhani possess the exclusive support of the Ayatollah Khomeini. No longer will he have the political capital of Iranians on the ground to impact long-term progressive changes that is more meaningful to Iran. No longer will we have a Rouhani that's in power, and that's the worst case scenario that you want. Any meaningful changes of a moderate Iran comes by virtue of having a moderate Rouhani in power. You lose that power and trust in Rouhani if you abandon Shiite's collective interest. We're very proud to oppose.
That's my phone.
You find my battery.
Alright. Thank you, member of opposition. Now I call upon the last speaker of the government bench. Number wait.
Here. Oh, wait. First of all, let me just entertain the theme of the debate first. The track record of Shiite regimes that are very harmful, such as Hezbollah and also Syria, shows that they really have taught us what we don't really like, as to what was mentioned in the feed. So now that I've already entertained that, I'm going to just base my speech structure on a lot of different scattered issues that happen in the debate. To a certain extent, there will be some addressing of different houses. Let's first of all address what we talked about and why it was largely dismissed by that side of the house. So while opening government did talk about why is it within Iran's best interest to disassociate themselves from these radical militias, we will tell you precisely why it is extremely difficult for you to moderate these militias. And we've also told you why, what are the characteristics of these militias, regardless of the spectrum, that it is hard for us to moderate them. Firstly, Alpha told you that a lot of these radical militias, no, thank you, are fundamentalist in nature. So, regardless as to whether they are moderate or there are maybe perhaps, I don't know, liberal militias out there, we believe to a very large extent they believe and also are convinced that force is needed and also permitted in order for them to show conviction of their stance. These are things and also values that the Iranian government or the moderation that is Hassan Rouhani does not endorse and cannot endorse for him to maintain the legitimacy of his political stance. This is the reason why, the main reason for this is because they believe, a lot of militias like Hezbollah, for example, believe that killing is justified. And we are permitted to do so, and that if you don't do this, you do not follow the word of God. This means that for you to gain even the smallest amount of traction of support from these groups, you would have no choice but to concede to the fundamentalism of these groups. So it's extremely difficult for you to even gain any traction from these groups. The second reason for this, ladies and gentlemen, is because simply the fact that Hassan Rouhani is seen as a moderating group and also the bridge between Iran and also the West, primarily the USA, shows that at the very least, as viewed by these militias, that they've complied to the imposition of the West. That initially within the Middle East, we have our own set of values, but the USA believed that your own national security, for example, or maybe some parts of your religion back in the past may not have been legitimate, and Hassan Rouhani agreed to that. This means that these militias have also seen such moderation as a means of Western imposition, and there is also another legitimate claim that will probably been made by these militias that establishes the fact that there are no reasons for us to comply to any form of the moderations that you would like to provide from your side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. So the conclusion here is very simple, and this was very echoed throughout the whole bench. The likelihood for you to moderate them is simply slim. So now let's use the comparative here. The comparative here is at the point at which you try to wait for the day that these militias may want to moderate themselves or may want to homogenize themselves to the Iranian government, you cannot have certainty on that. And that's when the image of Iran to be a moderating state is completely gone. And the reason for this, and this is the link, is because within the international community, the Iranian government will be seen as viscerally and also implicitly to be complicit with the killings that were done by these militias, ladies and gentlemen. That's precisely the same reason why a lot of different countries right now don't necessarily support Russia, for one of the reason being because of their own complicity with the actions of Bashar al-Assad, ladies and gentlemen. So therefore, you have no way for you to garner or monitor any of the diplomatic benefit that you may probably want from Iran. And then another issue here is that, well, homogenizing all Shiites in Iran is extremely bad. I think this was pretty clear from the whole government bench as well. The probability there is extremely off, because at the point at which the international community established Hassan Rouhani as a legitimate actor of Iran shows that they established that the majority of people in Iran actually do endorse moderation and do actually support the moderation that Hassan Rouhani actually supports. This means that there is visceral evidence that the people of Iran are actually moderate at the point at which Hassan Rouhani were elected. So now engaging with CEO, let's talk about Hassan Rouhani, right? No, thank you. She said that the main reason why we have to allow Hassan Rouhani to be the bridge between these militias and also Iran is because, number one, he was successful in, because he is represent the religious head of the collective of the Shiites in Iran. To which we say the first problem here, ladies and gentlemen, is that at the very end, he still has to find out how he wants to homogenize the Shiite militias, who have also called themselves Shiites, by the way, with how the Shiites operate within Iran as well. This means that by the end of the day, he has to take a side as to what sort of operations of Shiites exist in regards to these militias or in regards to another religion. This meaning the head of that religion or the head of the religion of that state, he's still unable to make sure that Iran is not seen as a radical group because they are complicit and because they support the killings that were done by these militias such as Hezbollah. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, we also believe in regards to how homogenizing all these militias are also harmful is because simply the motion implies that Iran is doing this for their own sake. So while we do agree, while we do agree that homogenization of regimes will probably be the same, meaning that they will probably imply that all of the different regimes out there, regardless of the different groups, radical they really are, we don't think that that is within Iran's best interest. And this means, ladies and gentlemen, is regardless whether, because without Iran, all of these different groups will be seen as radical, we think that it's far safer for Hassan Rouhani to make sure that they comply with the moderation that exists in Iran and make sure that in no probability whatsoever that he taints his political stance with any of the killings or with any of the stances by groups like Hezbollah and also regimes like Bashar al-Assad. And then there's also this one other concern that, well, maybe radical Shiites from other radical Shiites or other regimes will be funding each other as opposed to Iran funding them. To which we say this is a harm that exists in both sides. Why? Because we believe that within the collective radical fronts of the Shiites, they have a collective front and the incentive to garner support from as many regimes as possible. Because rhetorically, these Shiites requires empowerment and believe that it is a collective benefit to the people of the Shiite religions. So believe comparatively, number one, money anyway, but also number two, the trade-off is simply unjustified because now Iran will be dragged into this political mess. Ladies and gentlemen, from happy to say that I ran.
He's mine.
Alright, thank you, Governor. Wrap up the semi-finals. I call on the opposition with.
The extension coming from closing government was only made clear when it came out from Izzat's speech. But even if it was only clear when it came out from Izzat's speech, we still think that was already established in opening government's case. We think that there was a complete rehash. But even if he sort of have a little bit of engagement, we think that closing opposition still stands in the debate. Because we think that Mar's extension was not engaged at all by Izzat. We think that closing opposition stands in today's debate. Few things that I'm going to do, right? I'll firstly tell you about why closing opposition extension is the most relevant and how we are the ones that establish on why the benefits coming from opening opposition can also work and then take downside government's case, or why the benefits that they want to achieve will not be able to work, and why their end goal of trying to moderate Iran will not work when you want external radical parties coming in to support these Shiite groups. We don't think that your side will be able to achieve the end goal that we want to achieve. But let's look at what Izzat wanted to bring to you. Right? Firstly, he told you about how disassociate from this radicalism. But Mailee told you from the very beginning, because this messaging effect is something that is very subjective. Because people are not convinced that Iran is moderate even when there was already a nuclear concession going on. Because Iran still continues to violate human rights, and we think that the only structural change to Iran is coming from side closing opposition. Right. But secondly, because about this messaging effect is also something that is very subjective. We think that people can also see it in a different way by perceiving it by abandoning these Shiite regimes and groups within within the Sunni, within the ISIS, because the Shia and the Sunnis was generally the Cold War that was happening within the Middle East. So by abandoning this Shia group and not agreeing with this Shia ideology, people can also take the message and people are actually supporting this ISIS group within Sunni. We think that for Iran's sake, we don't think that it's beneficial for them. But secondly, he came out with this idea about how it is hard to moderate, right? But we think this on a comparative analysis
coming from both sides. Because under their side, they'll get zero trust between the Shiite government, between the Iran government and the Shia as well. Because the Shia people under your side will continue to be rebellious because the government does not want to support me. Meaning they will constantly go out and rebel the government, and the radical within your side will continue to persist. We don't think that you will achieve any form of change under your side. But how is under our side actually better? Because under our side, genuine change is more likely to happen when the government is willing to take an active stance to go in and try to engage with these Shiite groups within the community. We think that it's more willing for them to participate to change their mind. Because the comparative is this. Because when these Shiite groups are then more dependent upon the government, because they know that there's a certain amount of trust within the government with them, because they're dependent on the government to give them help and so on. We think that this is when the Shiite groups are more likely to believe that it's in their best interest for the government to do so. It's in their best interest for the government, the Iranian government, to actually go out and support these Shiite groups. But secondly, the trust that we can form is something that under your side will never happen. Because constantly go and rebel that our marginal is you. Let's feel at the extension my brought, because we told you about how Rouhani is uniquely someone who can actually project the moderate policies there. Because the condition that he has satisfied, the condition that he had to satisfy the political hardlines on the ground. Because he is the one that actually passed moderate policies, telling the society that's incidental to the political hardliners as well. Telling that my policy that is moderate may also be able to benefit you. Like this is how under our side Iran is actually getting even more progressive. How under our side we moderate Iran even better, right? We think that all his success that he was approved was all the success that he has achieved is something that Ayatollah has already approved. We think that this is a stepping stone that we actually really already have to establish Iran from getting even more moderate. No, thank you. But on the second level, we see that even if this is something that has already happened, but it's very easy for the Ayatollah to go against him, or the political hardliners to go against him. Because we think that if there's enough political hardliners going against him and blocking him, we think that it's already very easy for them to do so. But Hassan Rouhani is still in a very fragile state. We think that there's something that we need to establish first in order to get the moderation that we want to achieve. It's something that you also consented to, right? No, thank you. But let's look at the causation here. Because the supreme leader in Iran, which is Ayatollah, is the religious leader within the country. So by abandoning this Shia ideologies, is telling the society, telling Ayatollah that the Shia ideology is wrong. We think that this is a model win for the Sunni. By telling that I'm going, it's a Shia ideology, something that the Iranian government used to believe in. No, thank you. But in the Cold War between Sunni and Shia, it's not something that's not just outside Iran, but it's also something within the Iranian government as well. So for the own sake of the Iranian government, which means that we still think that Iranian government should go out and support them. But how is the Shia Iranian also, right? Because we also stand to lose the moral war, even for our own national interest. Because Ayatollah is the guardian of the Shia values within Iran, which means that he will never be able to tolerate a national policy that harms the Shia community or goes against the community. Conclusion is why he
not proper support. Given the same plan, at what point will Hassan Rouhani lose the support of his people?
Lose the support of even if that signaling effect that we said is subjective, that not everyone would trust that signaling effect, but we will still think that he will lose the support because the political hardliners and Ayatollah in his own country already does not trust him. But this is the outcome that only closing opposition proves to you, right? Because we cannot be able to pass long-term moderate policies anymore. Because he lost the support of the people on the ground, he lost the support of Ayatollah already for the very first step that you wanted to take, right? But that's not the first priority that both sides also want to engage. The OJ and CJ also wanted to fight for moderation, but closing opposition is the only one to prove to you the outcome is impossible considering the domestic politics of Iran. But secondly, we also talked to you about how Hassan Rouhani is currently in a very fragile state. Because we told you when he was elected, he made an election campaign. He said that he will help free these reformist opposition leaders without trial since 2011. But in status quo, these people are still under house arrest. But he made the agreement, the media censorship. He wants to include if you want to include liberal sides as well, this is something that is still restricted within status quo because he has not got approval from Ayatollah because the political hardliners are people that are still going against them. We think that Hassan Rouhani is still in a very fragile state. He's not able to do it now. But for the long-term benefit, to achieve the moderation of Iran in the long-term future, to be able to pass policy that is for moderation in long-term, go with that closing opposition.
Thank you, debaters. Please cross the floor. Thank you.